Hello and welcome. I hope you're having an awesome time at AI4 so far. Our next panel is called Creating AI Value, Deployment, Measurement, and AI Ethics. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. All right, it's all yours.
Thanks, Patrika, and thank you, AI4, for asking me to moderate this fun panel. I think it's going to be really exciting. I think we'll start in with some introductions. My name's Danny Siegel. I lead information delivery at Newell Brands. I'll turn it over to some of my panelists here for other introductions. Gaurav?
Yes, thank you, Danny. And it's wonderful to be here at AI4. I'm very excited. I'm Gaurav Deshpande. I'm Vice President of Marketing for TigerGraph. We are a graph database company that combines graph databases with AI and machine learning. And we work with some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in banking, in healthcare, in manufacturing, in retail, on transforming their AI projects. Personally, I've been in AI field for about 25 years now. My graduate school work was in AI for manufacturing, and AI doesn't seem to leave by my side. So that's a little bit about myself. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Gaurav. Tian?
Hi, everybody. I'm honored to I'm science, machine learning, and analytics at Walmart. My team is mostly data scientists, machine learning engineers, and analysts. We worked most on back office project from financial forecasting to operation steps to safety and legal domain. Before Walmart, I was the head of AI back in 7-Eleven, another retail business, which is similar, but Walmart. Also has a hedge fund and commercial banking, capital, and financial. All of these industry experience are in the AI, machine learning, and analytical domain.
Thanks, Tian. Deepthi?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Deepthi Bathina, Chief Clinical Product Officer of Humana. And as part of my role at Humana, I lead clinical product management organization and customer success functions for Humana, serving customers within Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial segments. And Humana as a whole, we are deeply committed to solving our customer problems, leveraging many latest technologies like artificial intelligence. And I'm personally come from a heavy tech background. I sometimes brag that I can still code if I wanted to. Those are my roots. And applying my technology background and business background to solve healthcare problems is something that keeps me very excited in life.
Thanks, Deepthi. That's great. And I'll tell you, it's funny that I share your interest in loving to every once in a while get my hands on the keyboard and get to play with the AI and ML capabilities that we offer our internal business partners. I didn't mention a little bit about Newell Brands. I give such a brief introduction. Newell Brands, of course, a large consumer products company, dozens and dozens of brands, Mr. Coffee, Mate, Coleman, I could go on and on, rubber, so many, it's hard to list them all. But my role at Newell is to both provide AI and ML services to our business partners, as well as to enable the data scientists in and around our company, of which there are many. So I'll get into more of that detail when we respond to some of the questions. I think hopefully my peers here will as well. So without further ado, why don't we jump into some of the questions? If you could put the first one up there. So to start, is it obvious to you that investing heavily in AI is important? I'll give my own perspective briefly before going around the horn here. I think the short answer is, for the type of company we are, which is a channel manufacturer. So we do have a direct-to-consumer presence online and certain outlet stores. Certainly in our candle business, we have hundreds of stores. But our retail presence in general isn't that big. So for us, I think because we don't have such high touch business with our consumers on a day-to-day basis, it isn't always obvious that artificial intelligence is a critical thing to invest in. I think certainly to many of our executives that I speak to, they are more and more interested in, we're coming up with more and more creative ways to apply it. But the investments, I think, are measured. Part of that is probably because, sometimes bigger investment follows bigger success, right? So we're trying to have some wins in AI and ML applications. And as those wins occur, more investment will follow. I think we're moving at a very good pace, have some really wonderful applications we can talk about later. But I would say the short answer is it's sort of not at a high pace of investment at this point, but certainly we're making some deliberate and measured investments, both in platform and capability within our company. I'll start just kind of going around the celebrity squares here. Start with Gaurav.
Thank you, Danny. And yeah, I agree with you that it has been really hard for certain industries like manufacturing to adopt AI in its earnest because you're not directly consumer facing. But what we have seen with our customer base is they are turning inwards towards their supplier base and analyzing that information with AI and advanced analytics, combining the two together to actually do. So I'll give a specific customer example. Jaguar Land Rover, as all of you know, is a big consumer brand, right? Many of us love their cars. I personally do. So Jaguar Land Rover is a customer of ours, and their supply chain planning process, they have streamlined using a combination of advanced analytics and TigerGraph to actually reduce that window from 3 weeks to 45 minutes. So as a result of that, the 3-week to 45-minute transformation really helped them in COVID-19 pandemic as supplies got disrupted, borders got closed down, part supply was not available. They really looked at their supplier risk and analyzed it with their project. And that helped them with reduce the supplier risk by 35%. And by crunching down their supply chain planning and doing it a lot more frequently. So that's an example of a manufacturer. So consumer is one part, but the other part of the equation is the supplier part. And we see a lot of our manufacturers implementing AI and machine learning towards the supplier end to manage the supplier risk associated, especially with COVID-19, tsunami, and everything else that's coming along in terms of disruptions in supply chain.
Other thoughts on this topic?
Hi, I can go next. Humana, in general, just to share a little bit our presence, we serve over 8 million of Medicare members and about 6 million of TRICARE members and 1.3 million of commercial members as of September 30th, 2020. And for us, it's extremely obvious that we are investing very heavily into artificial intelligence. Just one great stat is we recently created a central, what we call digital health and analytics organization we already have over 100 data scientists we hired in recent years, and it continues to grow. And also, as you may have seen from several press releases we've done in the last 1 year, we've also heavily invested into many cutting-edge cloud platforms. For example, Salesforce for care management, Microsoft Azure Power Platform for analytics, all of this also to accelerate AI technologies. And we believe in interconnectivity of all these platforms. We also built a very Humana's own machine learning platform with the sole aim to improve the ease of experimentation, development, deployment of machine learning AI models to solve for the North Star of our customer problems. We say, whether it's AI or any latest technology, our main goal is to solve for our customer problems, but can't emphasize enough how excited we are and the investment going into artificial intelligence.
Anything to add, Tian?
Sure. So I'm in retail industry. It's very interesting when I compare and contrast in retail industry and manufacturing, for example. So one thing about retail industry is it's a pretty much proven on the market that AI and machine learning is going to make an impact for this domain. But if you, since you mentioned about consumer facing, so my previous role in 7-Eleven, I have one of my pillar was more like the marketing personalization space. You can see like even if you are in a relatively new organization getting into the AI domain, that is proven by the market. So the acceptance of that domain is given. Other people prove it for you. But when it comes to more like a back office, which is my focus at this moment, it's a lot about at Walmart. It's a lot about these operation steps that is less consumer facing. And then you encounter more of receptance, but at the same time, some ambiguity about what AI can add value to this domain. One thing I want to say about Walmart is we try to provide customer good life with lowest cost, which actually have a very strong indication about you need to really leverage AI and machine learning. Otherwise, there's no better way to really provide customer that kind of value with the minimum cost we could.
And it's funny, as probably one of your larger suppliers, Tian, Newell brands, obviously we do a lot of business together. And to some degree, we're almost silent partners in that you're working very hard to provide the best experience to your customers, and working very hard. And I don't think it would be proprietary to say we focus on our internal, I would say the most prominent use cases we have at the moment for the application of machine learning techniques is on internal data to improve our profitability, to improve our understanding of how to best serve you. I would say that's probably, and this will get a bit into the next question, but that's probably one of those areas we were able to have quick wins, early pilots to show some successes in improving our service levels, improving our ability to serve, and keep our costs down so that we can kind of continue that jointly beneficial relationship as vendor customer. I think why don't we jump on to the next question here? Our approach to the pilot programs when it comes to AI. I think so. Again, I'll just kind of tee us up here. One of the things we've done with pilot AI programs, I think, to make it cheap. I mean, here's the reality of data science and machine learning, and hopefully you guys will back me up on this, is it's highly failure prone. So a lot of the energy and time invested in ideation and hypothesis testing proves that there isn't a great model to predict or to categorize something, and therefore you kind of move on to the next good idea. Conceptually, we've created an environment at Newell such that we can provision it quickly, get started working on it, test ideas quickly at scale, and fail fast and cheap, right? So we want to get in there, get it tested really fast, say, nope, this isn't going anywhere. There's no real model, or the variables that we have to try to predict this aren't really proving out. Let's move on to the next good idea. We'll come back to it, right? Kind of archive it. And that's something that was sort of the early architecture work around our laboratory environments, which we kind of provisioned for these purposes. A lot of thought went in that to make sure that we in fact could do that. We'd spin it up really fast, spin it down, and have everything saved, and that pattern recognized in case we want to pick it up again later. And so the best ideas sort of are the ones that make it to the next level. So we've sort of enabled the data scientists in our businesses to, on a whim, jump in, get cross-charged, right, as a divisional kind of enterprise for the use of those platforms, and then say, you know what, we don't want this anymore, we'll just simply turn it off. And that's what's kept us, I would say, useful to our business partners and as a valuable partner to our data scientists. Anyone else want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, sure, I can, Danny. What you just said resonated very well with me. I would say even at Humana, it's never technology for the sake of technology, right? The way we approach anything to do with AI pilots, these actually would be trust but verify outcomes, especially for us in healthcare. We go after what we call balanced outcomes. We have very strict product phases and very I would say, well thought out, well-rounded, what we call exit criteria for products to get from one phase to other, ideation, or if we want to validate in certain population. And before we're going to scale a AI-oriented product to entire population, which we support, there has to be a lot of criteria. And I could summarize it by saying we look at leading indicators for what we call balanced outcomes. And the balanced outcomes are customer experience, which means how are we improving their health and how are we improving their well-being and how are they experiencing it. Sure. And then with clinical and quality outcomes, such as the nature of our business, we got to have our eye on clinical quality outcomes and also the financial aspects. Everyone here knows how important it is, even the financial aspects of healthcare, and that's what we call balanced outcomes. And at every phase, we strictly put AI through AI modeled approaches through it. And we do stop products or iterate and evolve them where they don't meet the criteria, but we have many successful examples as well. One good example I can share in this context is we actually use AI-driven technologies to proactively identify members to say who are facing social determinants of health, like loneliness, food insecurity, and things like that. If we don't identify such members, it's very tough for us to drive better health outcomes. Today, AI-driven technologies help us identify such members. We empower our care managers to actually use the information identified and help people with resources they need so they can focus on their health. And as a related stat I'm extremely proud of about Humana is, year to date so far, we've served more than 1.4 million meals were delivered through Humana through Well-Dine program. We delivered more than 1 million meals during COVID-19 pandemic. So very proud of the work that Humana does using these technologies.
Impressive, thank you.
That's phenomenal. Is it okay if I expand on another healthcare example, building on Deepthi's business outcome-based approach? So one of my customers is United Health Group, and they actually started with a very nice pilot around their customer 360. So now their entire 50 million members customer 360 is delivered with TigerGraph, but they started small with one particular division, which is the Medicare and Retirement, the M&R group within United Health Group. They built out the customer 360, and now they rolled it out to the entire organization. So every time somebody picks up the phone and calls the call center, the call center agent can pick up a customer 360 that goes across the entire timeline to see what tests have we done with this customer, what prescriptions have they had in the past and what they have right now. Have they done physiotherapy visits? Have they done their wellness checkups, their doctor visits, their dental, their vision, their mental behavior claims? Everything is all in a single timeline that's generated in real time. And I stress that it's generated in real time based on streaming data, not based on old data. And then based on that, you can just simply say, find similar patients. And in 50 milliseconds, TigerGraph combined with AI brings back top 100 matching patients that match a particular patient's 200 different features. So this is something that they rolled out starting with Customer 360 with M&R, the Medicare and retirement community, one particular BU, and then rolled it out to a broader plan. So this business outcome-based approach to say, let's provide each of our call center agents, 23,000 of them, with a Customer 360, start small, start in one division, and then roll it out with success across the entire organization.
That's a great use case. Tian?
That's interesting. So when I think about pilot program, I think about several factors: people, value, feasibility, technical feasibility, whether it's measurable, the outcome is measurable, and then the last one is compoundable. So I think a lot of my fellow panelists was focusing a lot about the value, which is super important. But I did put people before the value because that's one of the challenges I was facing in multiple of my role. It's like when you want to pilot a program, especially if this is the pilot program for the whole company, the right partner is super important. And also the executive buy-in. So you need to have group of people who really have the buy-in and have the right mentality to go into a pilot program. So that's what I find, like people with always make a difference in any of these pilot efforts. And then when I think about the rest of those factors, I actually encountered a situation of piloting in a completely white space and piloting in a relatively more mature company. Just AI is new for them. And then it's also, I encountered piloting an AI program that in a specific business domain, but other business domain are relatively mature in the AI space. So in different situation, I find that these factors actually weigh differently if you think about them. So for like a completely wide space, I think it's a lot about demonstrating value and establish the confidence. So in that case, the people value and the feasibility are really, really important. And then measurable is also important because not every AI project can be very easily measured. And some of those AI projects, you can't even do A/B testing, which becomes like a very complicated measurement from a data science perspective.
Yeah, I think, I was just going to say, Tian, I totally agree with you on the measurement front. It was actually a topic, our next question. The one thing that you said that I was just thinking about though, back to the very first question, the maturity of the business partner and the leadership and to understand what AI and ML is. Let's face it, it's a bit of an esoteric thing, right? It's a little complex to understand for, I mean, not quite for someone like you who has the mathematics background and so forth and statistics background that really understands how it works. But what it's good for and what it's not good for, because it's not exactly just science. It's a little bit of a dark art. Understanding of data and understanding how to do data engineering is probably 80% of the work, is the sort of the dirty secret, right? The other thing I think that's interesting, and I might just throw this in as a sort of corollary question is, it's one thing to pilot a program, but to turn something into a production asset is actually yet another step, right? It's pretty easy to spin something up on a laptop or a virtual machine or something and create something, hey, this is actually showing some real efficacy, turning that into a routine insight. And I can speak for myself that's actually something we're engineering right now, is creating the pipelines and the sort of the DevOps framework to be able to move those models into a routine cycle of ideation, exploration, improvement, getting to a viable model, and then moving it into production and managing and monitoring it so that it stays a viable model. Have you sort of seen, I'll direct this at you, Tian, only because you're sort of talking about it. Do you have the same kind of cycle that you have to go through?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And then that's somehow like what I was talking about, compoundable. So one really interesting challenge of a pilot program is if you do a really good job of that pilot program, you're going to create a lot of excitement. And then it's come to you to really make it scalable and build it into a system. So right now there's a lot of discussion about excitement around ML DevOps. So the major idea is that ML is not just that little ML algorithm in the middle. It's a whole system. And then whether your enterprise is ready to take a pilot into a really full-fledged machine learning solution, build a system that has a lot of variation. And that's why like you're piloting in a whole new company, new to AI, or you're piloting in a mature IT company just missing that AI piece. It's very, very different when you think about the compoundability and then the enterprise readiness. And then the more excitement you create, the more pressure on you to actually make it happen and as fast as possible. Right? So, so it needs to be a balance.
That's the curse of success, Tian. That's in the interest of time, I'll ask Patrika to pop up the next question here because we want to stay on time. So how do we measure success when it comes to AI projects? Examples, please. And we already started to touch on the concept of measurement. I think, maybe I'll save my comments there. I think there's the empirical side, which is pretty straightforward. I think we probably agree, if you're going to improve, I don't know, Deepthi outcomes, or you're going to improve a forecast accuracy or something, like that's a fairly straightforward thing to do. You have a sample you hold to the side, you have the sample that's modeled, one's better than the other, you have success. But there's kind of a softer side too. And I think I can think of some applications that I probably can't talk about, but things where you're actually changing business process too, where things are you're accelerating people's capability, almost enabling processes to go faster and helping people see patterns that they need to act on, but they wouldn't see as human beings. The machine sees it and brings it to their attention, and then they can act on it. But in and of itself, it's not adding a dime of value. The only value is in the action that the user takes. So I'll throw it out there to my peers here. What kind of commentary do you have here on the measurement?
So I can share a banking example now, switching to the banking industry, because that's one of our major industries, Danny, Tian, and Deepthi. Fraud detection and risk management is hugely important for banks, and it's usually important for retail as well, and for healthcare as well. So what we see typically customers is qualifying fraud detection and measure the quantitative part of it, right? Of course, you can measure the accuracy improvement with a new machine learning based solution that can improve, for example, 50% or more accuracy of fraud detection based on a graph-based approach. So that is the quantitative part of it. But on the qualitative side, what we have seen is the fraud investigators that actually work and the risk management people that work with the software, they feel more empowered and more efficient because they're able to see the network of connected accounts, network of connected businesses, people a lot faster to a payment transaction or an order, and then determine if this is a risk worth calibrating to say, I need to monitor this more, or this is something that's benign and we can move past that. So that increase in the confidence of people leads to better productivity and more confident approach to fraud detection and risk management. So it's hard to quantify this. I don't know how to quantify it. We do improve fraud detection by 50% in terms of accuracy. We do that, but that's the quantitative part. The qualitative part is the improvement in confidence of their jobs and what they do as fraud investigators and risk management. We do it for about 8 out of top 10 banks in the world. We do it for some retailers, some healthcare providers also. But the whole thing is we see this again and again with fraud investigation team, improvement in confidence that is there in their jobs to do their jobs well and deliver value.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, Danny, I can share a couple of examples because I think examples will speak to it. Is very interesting to hear, Gaurav, from you, a banking example. And within healthcare, while the variations of how we apply AI and how we measure outcomes will vary depending on the product area itself. For example, currently in the clinical product area that we run, it could be the AI applications could range from behavioral health to utilization management to care management, pharmacy, and depending on which area we are working on, how we measure success could be very different. I'll give 2 examples. One is a consumer-facing front-end kind of example, and one more of an operations-facing kind of example, and you'll see the difference. Take behavioral health, for example. We actually have a product now where we leverage AI-driven technology to manage the needs of population with seriously mentally ill conditions like depression, bipolar kind of ones. Typically, this population have very difficult time engaging with healthcare systems, and they have a lot of non-adherence with treatments. And sometimes they have symptoms like delusions, hallucinations, poor impulse control. It's actually very difficult, even for their caretakers, to anticipate when things could start escalating. And this population utilize emergency services 300 times more than others. So you see what the customer problem there is. And what we're doing now is we use an AI-driven app that our customers could download from their smartphone, and using the smart keyboard, and depending on how we measure clicks and swipes, it actually AI can map just by the way they are clicking and swiping to neurocognitive scales. And the big change here is the software here anticipate a need for care, very proactively avoiding an escalation, versus reactively we find out about it after our members land at, say, emergency services. This model, because of how AI works, keeps getting better with time, improves sensitivity, anticipates needs, even before anyone knows. And we measure success in a very concrete outcome-driven way. For example, this pilot we're speaking about for the seriously mentally ill population, there were 248 events over 6 months when we measured where members were stabilized proactively at home, instead of traditionally they would have been directed to emergency or hospitalization. It's just amazing to see how latest technologies can make a difference.
I know. I promised I wouldn't do this, Deepthi, and I got to ask one quick question. And I might. This is just for interest, and maybe others are interested. So I know there's a lot of people running models these days, largely supervised models, meaning the training of the model and the setting of super parameters or whatnot are being done in a kind of a test system or like a dev system. But then in a model like that, you'd want it locked. So it's only, it's only the most highest efficacy model, and it's not self-training and retuning itself over time. Do you allow models to run unsupervised like that, or is it typically supervised and then used in a production context?
It depends. If you don't mind, I'll follow up with you on the question of that, because it really depends, and we have a broad portfolio. I want to make sure that give accurate answer.
Okay, no, that's fair. Because one could be 10 answers, right, to that same question. So,
yeah, exactly. Sorry, it depends on the portfolio. No worries.
Tian, did you have anything to add? Oh, I'm sorry, Deepthi. I didn't realize you weren't finished. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that that example I gave is for behavioral health, but if we were to switch the healthcare area, the measurement would be completely different. So I guess all I'm trying to say is answers really vary. Everything varies depending on what customer problem we're solving. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to add two things, more like specific points. I find like a compliment with whatever said before. One is what is the right moment to measure? So what I meant is, would you expect one single project to really move the needle? Or would you think about like a portfolio of project could collect together will have like a exponential effect, when not 1 + 1 = 2, but 1 + 1 = 11 kind of effect. And sometimes I feel like AI project has a very significant aspect of this. If you just change one small piece in your whole flow, you may not see the difference. But if you change multiple steps, you suddenly see a very big difference. And that's what transformation means. So if you now measurement at what granularity level should you be discouraged if you don't see a very clear win in your first and the second project? So that is something I want to just call out. And that's a judgment call combined with some strategic level of thinking. That's one. Another one is I see very often undervalued is a qualitative measurement. So quantitative measurement is very tangible, very material. So people really like to go with those quantitative measurement. But qualitative measurement gives you a whole different aspect. So it's not measuring just one specific point, it actually measures the whole experience. And then in consumer-facing project, I think some Deepthi mentioned before. So consumer-facing project, it really complement each other when you see the quantitative and the qualitative measurement together.
That's great. Thanks. I'll Patricia, if you could pop the next question here, we'll keep things moving. Regulations about how we, that might hinder or direct how we develop AI capabilities. I think this is a critical question for all of us, particularly those of us who are working directly with consumer or deep in your case, patient data. I'll speak for myself again. Since we're not dealing with consumer data, it's often customer, meaning it's enterprises, not humans. The bar is a bit lower in terms of the level of care that we have to take. But even so, we tend to be very careful not to bias the way that we're creating models. I actually went to a lecture. Who was the author? Kathy O'Brien, I believe her name is. She wrote the book, what is it? Weapons of Math Destruction. If you ever read, it's a great read, but it's that kind of that guidance that she's a wonderful mathematician who sort of talked about how it's very easy to build bias completely blindly into an AI model that might actually drive some really negative outcomes, or just, let's just say, biased outcomes. At least in Newell's case, we haven't because we're focused, I would say early on, we've been focused very much on internal data, sort of operational data. The bar has been quite low. I would say now that we get more into, say, e-com data, we're becoming much more cogent and careful and deliberate in the way that we model the information. I'll pass it to some of the folks who probably have more to say on that.
Hey, Danny, as you touched upon, especially for someone like Humana, where we are working on the health side, one good example is a HIPAA regulation. It's a good regulation. As you all know, it governs how we use data, for what purposes, how do we utilize data models. It's actually meant to protect information about our members. It's a good thing. It's a great thing. At Humana, we see it as a necessity, given we are dealing with very sensitive information. And in fact, we love these regulations as guardrails because we cannot possibly be too careful given the nature of the services we operate.
I want to add a couple of things. So regulation, we also have the regulation from ethical perspective, from governance perspective. Internally, we also have regulation around the security perspective. So Walmart being the #1, security is really one of the big focus. And that also related to customers' information security, right? So that's another direction we have it. And then beyond that, we also have a regulation about the cost. You can't just freely spin up whatever kind of resource you want, because costs have indication of the overall company's healthiness, and then that will directly relate to whether we can deliver the right value to our customer. So that's another aspect of a regulation. That being said, I do think I resonate a lot with what Danny answered in the first question. So we need to be able to have this dev environment that is less controlled, very secure, but also in some other aspect less controlled, so we can very quickly prototype. But I do appreciate all of these regulations. It just gives you a guardrail, watch your back. You don't do anything unintentional damage. They're very, very necessary.
You took it in a totally different direction. It's kind of interesting. When I read the question, even before the panel, I thought to myself, it was asking specifically about the misuse or the bias that you might create in a model. But you're right, the guardrails around, it's not a good idea to use $100,000 worth of infrastructure or give somebody the latitude to do that to solve a problem that has a $20,000 payback, for example. So yeah, the kind of the financial constraints on what's practical in terms of how we go develop and deliver things. Gaurav, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to take a different industry example here, media and entertainment. So I'll give a regulation example. As you know, first-party cookies, third-party cookies are being phased out, right, in a year or so. So third-party cookies means somebody has a cookie about you and they can sell that cookie off to an advertiser, and then advertiser can market based on that, right? It's a massive shift for advertisers because they have to really get their act together on their first-party cookies. The information that they own can legally use as a part of marketing. So we are seeing a huge push from media and entertainment industry, specifically those who are focused on advertising, online advertising, to make sure that they're compliant with the regulation of stopping to use third-party cookies. And that's driving a increased emphasis on first-party cookie analysis and adoption and use of AI and machine learning to actually understand the trends based off of that information. So we are seeing reprioritization in this manner with customers switching over to understand their own data that they have access to and they have rights for a little bit more, because the easy thing about third-party cookies and marketing based on that is going away. So that's a unintended consequence of a regulation, which is excellent for us as consumers. And it's really good for TigerGraph because they're coming to us to say, help us identify these cookies better. But even going beyond that, it's a great thing that companies are being good corporate citizens and thinking about how they can phase out the dependence on non-approved customer data and then switching to using approved customer data for really doing, because it's nothing more annoying than receiving an offer that is not in context or it's not useful for you. Right. Me as a consumer, I hate that. And I'm glad that companies are moving in that direction to phase out the use of third-party cookies. Yeah. That's a little bit of a perspective from my end.
That's an interesting example. I think the whole concept of governance around AI and when to employ it, how to employ it, how much to invest in it, depending on the circumstance, at least for Newell, has, it's somewhat dependent on the business partner. Is the business question really a viable one? Do we have the data? It's all the classic questions, I would say, at this point. But we don't want to turn away good ideas, but we also don't want to accept every idea, because I think it's just as easy to get lost in the forest of trying to overanalyze and not come up with value. So having some constraints in place actually can force you to hone your ideas a bit more. Let's jump on to the last question here. And this is, I guess we're touching on this to some degree already. Patrika, thank you very much. So is mitigating AI bias and the conversation around AI ethics in our organization's mind? I mean, the short answer is kind of to what I mentioned before. Absolutely, yes. Certainly on my mind. And touching on something, can't remember who said it, but first and foremost, securing the data. So I think one of the scariest things is having sensitive data that you're using for modeling that people have entrusted you with, and not storing it in somehow of a very secure way. So we go to great pains to make sure that we're working with data in a highly secure manner. Then building, I think the question though, building bias into models solely because we haven't gone down the consumer road yet. We're a little less concerned with building bias. We're seeking, I guess you'd just say it's financial gain at this point, as opposed to specific consumer grasping certain consumers' attention. We haven't been presented with that problem yet, but I see it coming now that we're starting to work with more e-com data. Can others suggest some other responses to this?
Deepthi probably have a very good point in this domain.
Hi. For us, this is a big thing. We have regular active discussions about AI bias, and we want to ensure that thoughtful process for recognizing and addressing it. What we do is we make sure that bias and ethics related AI is front and center to Humana's strategy for expanding adoption of AI. We actually signed the Equal AI Pledge, Danny, and partnering with leaders in this area to detect and mitigate against unforeseen, undetected bias in our AI models. I have an example. Underprivileged communities may not be accessing healthcare because of very many barriers. And we need to make sure by using social variables, we are trying not to rely on information that would propagate even more of such bias. Right. And we actually have separate AI models to eliminate risk of being underserved. So I think more than anywhere else, to me personally, it feels like healthcare is absolutely one area where we need to make sure it's taken care of, and Humana is totally committed to it.
I'll build a little bit on Deepthi's example on underprivileged communities access, and I'll take it in a different industry because I'm intimately involved in responsible AI for multiple banks. As I mentioned, 8 out of top 10 banks use us for fraud detection and risk management. Part of the risk management, Danny, Deepthi, and Tian, is about understanding whether to approve a particular loan or not based on a set of parameters, right? Whether to grant a particular credit card, whether to approve a personal loan, an automobile loan, a home loan. The bias tends to creep into it if you have a complete black box AI machine learning model. So the way the banks are solving it is by doing graph-based feature generation. So they actually generate features based on the characteristics of the applicant, regardless of their, no information about their race, ethnicity, anything else, just based on the facts, generate graph-based features and use those to make a decision, to defend the decision or to make a decision responsibility, and then understand those features to say, is the bias creeping in? Do we need to adjust the model? Are these 20 features are more biased towards an affluent community or a non-privileged, are more biased towards granting privileged community members home loans and credit cards and everything else? And then is this leading to a bias? So when you have those features and you actually say, this is a good applicant, this is a poor applicant from a risk perspective, then you look at those side by side, the 200, 300 features generated by a graph database and other things. And then you say, by responsible AI, I'm doing the right things because these 200 features correctly qualify the risk in a material fashion without keeping the underprivileged communities out. So when you start to marry that up data with actual machine learning generation, it does two things. It does actual qualification of the features that are generated, and it also allows you to train your ML with additional training data. So that's what we see with responsible AI, transparency in terms of more relationship feature generation.
Tian, can you comment? Because I have a feeling you deal with a lot of consumer data. There might be some opportunities for bias.
Yeah, so Walmart actually have a specialized group called Digital Citizenship to really take on the mission of coming up with good guidelines for ethics aspect of AI and this domain. And then when I first landed in Walmart about a year ago, I started to organize a meetup. And the first meetup, the topic was ethical AI. So I personally take it very seriously in this domain. But my struggle, and I'm taking it to a different direction, is it's really a hard problem to solve. Because when I look up ethics, it's a branch of philosophy. So when it comes to philosophy, it's never an easy, straightforward answer, but it is something very, very important. If you think about the human history, how long we spend to try to tackle philosophical question, that's through the whole existence of our intelligence so far. And then are we really solving that problem from the fundamental level? And so when it comes to AI, it's even more challenging. And the reason is it's developing really, really fast. Yeah. So it's an exponential growth at this stage. We need to catch up. Our thinking about ethics need to really catch up with the speed of technology development. Yeah. And then, one thing I noticed is normally when we talk about ethics, we involve engineers, we involve data scientists, we involve lawyers, but rarely probably any organization involves the philosophers, and that's that probably can really accelerate a good decision making in this front. Yeah. And that's the direction I want to take it sidetrack a little bit. Like we need to make a good decision really fast, and who can help us to make that a good decision? Maybe we need to take a step back and think about this front.
Makes sense. And let's face it, data scientists by training often aren't ethicists. They're data scientists. So their natural inclination is to create great models, which isn't always, that's a great path and you want them to do it well, but we want them to do it with the right kind of, in the right headspace to do the right thing for society. So I see we're at the balance of our time. I've loved talking to the three of you. I've learned so much. This is why I love doing things like that. Thanks so much. Thanks to AI4 for putting this on. I'm going to pass the baton back to Patrika to wrap things up.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of our awesome panelists. This has been a really engaging discussion, and I've learned so much from all of you. So a big virtual round of applause for everyone. All right, if you are looking for your next session, go ahead and check out your agenda, or you can take some time to network with your peers with some one-on-one meetings, or check out our awesome sponsors' virtual booths. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.